In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to get the smooth skin effect without losing texture or contrast. Now that I have this document ready, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the lock and I'm going to duplicate this layer 3 times. So I'm going to select it and press Ctrl J 3 times. I want the bottom duplicate to be the background, so I'm just going to rename this one background. For the other 3 layers, I want them to be in the same group, so I'm going to select all 3 and I'm going to go down here to the group icon and group all 3 layers together. The next thing I'm going to do is isolate the person from the background. To do so, I have to make a selection around the person. In the interest of time, I'm just going to use the quick selection tool. You might want to use something like the pen tool so you can be more precise. I trust that you already know how to make a selection. I'm not going to go over that right now. I'm just going to go right through this part. Side note, if you hear me talk different in certain parts of this video, it's because I wasn't able to finish recording this voiceover yesterday, and I'm just finishing recording this right now. Your vocal cords can change a bit throughout the day, hence the reason why I might sound a bit different. Okay, so let's pretend that I have a perfect selection. I really don't. It's actually very messy, but for this purpose, let's just pretend that it's a perfect selection. Now I'm just going to select the group, and I'm going to go down to the layer mask icon, and I'm going to create a layer onto the group, and I'm going to press Ctrl I so that I can invert the layer mask because it's actually going to be backwards. Now I'm going to move on to the actual part where I start making this look smooth. I'm going to use the Smudge Tool. This is very basic, so I'm just going to speed this part up, and I'm just going to talk over it as it's moving forward. I'm going to be using a soft brush, so just right click and reduce the hardness all the way down to 0. And I'm going to be using something around 20 to 30% strength. Any more than that, and this is going to be a little bit too crazy, you won't have as much control. But keep in mind, you will have to tweak this if your photo has more or less texture than this one. So keep that in mind. The one thing you do need to look out for is trying not to make a mess. For example, trying not to mix these darker pixels with these brighter pixels. I'm just going to raise the strength here and I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about. You can easily make this look very messed up if you start mixing in these pixels, so try to avoid that. Try using shorter strokes and don't do any circles. Also, while I'm working around this chin area, you might notice that the line that separates the chin from the neck actually got a little bit more blurry. You don't want to worry too much about that because we're going to bring that detail back later. The one time you might want to worry about being a little bit more precise is when working with areas around tattoos, because you don't want to smudge out the lines on the tattoos because it's just going to look messy, but I'll get to that in a minute. Now that I'm working around the tattoos, you'll notice how I'm trying to avoid touching the lines with the smudge tool. I'm mostly working around and inside because there's areas inside the tattoos where I can actually do a little bit of work, but other than that, I stay away from the lines. So just be mindful about that. Just to clarify, I do apply this onto the clothing sometimes, but it really depends. You're going to have to use your own judgment. For example, here on the shorts, I didn't really think it needed it because of the type of texture it has, but I would normally do it on the shirt. I actually did do it for the shirt in the original version, but for now, I'm just going to skip that so that I can move on to the part where we're actually going to get some of the detail back as well as add contrast. The next thing I'm going to do is go over to my adjustments panel and I'm going to create a hue and saturation layer, and I'm going to turn the saturation all the way down so that we can get a black and white image. This is because we don't really care about the colors and we're actually going to be messing with the colors. So to avoid any confusion, we're just going to isolate this into a black and white image so we can see the shadows and the brightness. Next, we're going to go to the selective panel again and create a selective color layer. Here I suggest you try messing around with all of these colors individually. Try moving around these sliders to see what gives you the best result, to get the best contrast. The fact that we have all the colors separated and have their own sliders gives us a lot more liberty, so it really helps to have all these colors separate. For now, I'm going to skip down to the part that makes the most difference, which is whites, neutrals, and blacks. And as you can see here, the whites is really controlling the intensity of the hue, which was really a problem for me because it was too bright. So this is really getting the exposure under control for me, because the last thing I want is to add even more exposure. Now I'm going to go down to the blacks area. I'm going to skip the neutrals for now. I'll go back to those in a minute. Now here, what you want to look out for is not making the dark areas of the shadows entirely black, because that would be too much. You want them to be a sort of dark gray. You don't want the contrast to be too high right now. Now for the neutrals, you may or may not see that much different. You may find it difficult to work with. So in case you really want an extra boost, you can just go to your adjustments panel again and open a curves layer. Now here you can just move this around a bit until you feel happy with the result. Now what you're going to do is select these 4 layers Remember, the top duplicate doesn't have any effects on it. So select these 4 layers and merge them together. The next thing you're going to do is go to blending mode and switch it to soft light. And after that, what you want to do is reduce the opacity or the fill. There's a very subtle difference. Sometimes I feel like fill gives me a better result, but like I said, it's very subtle, so you don't have to worry that much about it. So just reduce this because the contrast is a little bit too high right now. I always go below 50%, but it's really up to you. We reduce the opacity for 2 reasons. One, so that we can reduce the contrast because it's too much. And second, so that we can actually see the layer that's below this one, which is the layer that has been smoothed out. Now we're going to select the layer that has a smooth effect as well, and we're going to turn the opacity all the way down, and we're going to start increasing it little by little just so that we can tell the difference. We don't want this one to be at 100% either, unless you really want to. Personally, I don't like this effect to be too intense, so I always bring it down to below 50%. For the most part, you really just want to mess around with the opacity from the top layer and the middle layer until you get it just right. Here's a quick before and after. Now you can see that it doesn't look entirely natural. There's some effect there. But one thing that really does help after doing this process is dodging and burning. So I'm just going to show you how I would go on about that. I'm going to open this group and I'm going to create a new group inside of this group and I'm going to name it effects. That's where I'm going to put all the layers that have the effects on them. Now I'm just going to select all 3 of these duplicates and I'm going to put them inside of a group while I have them inside of this main group. This is just to keep everything organized. That way, if I decide to add any more layers or any more effects, I can just add them into the effects group rather than have everything disorganized in the group where I have the main photos. So for the dodging and burning effect, I'm going to go to my adjustments panel and I'm going to go to curves and I'm going to bring the brightness up, select the layer mask on the curves layer, and I'm going to press Ctrl I so that I can invert this white into black. And now the brightness from the curves layer is hidden. Now I'm going to press B to select my brush. And now I'm going to mess around with the settings up top because since I'm working with the Wacom tablet, I have access to pressure sensitivity. If you're working with a mouse, just look at the top and reduce the opacity to somewhere below 50% maybe, so that it's not too intense. That way you have a little bit more control. Now to start applying the effect, make sure you have the layer mask selected on the curves layer and start painting in the areas with white. I'm mostly focusing on the brighter areas that are already highlighted a bit from the photo. So I'm just painting over these brighter areas, trying to make it look a little bit more dramatic. You can also create a curves layer, and instead of making it bright, you can make it dark and do the same methods. Just start painting in the dark areas so that you can make them a little bit more darker to add more contrast. And since you're painting with the brush, you have a little bit more control. Here's a quick side-by-side comparison. Now, obviously this video doesn't cover all the filters and all the color grading I did, but as far as this effect goes, this is pretty much all I did. Just keep in mind the dodging and burning, and that's pretty much it. Let me know what you thought about this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video.